Okay, so picture this. It is the spring of 1991, and the CIA and White House physicians are basically in full-blown panic mode.
Oh, absolutely. They launched this highly classified, incredibly urgent environmental investigation.
Right, at Camp David. And the reason is wild. The President of the United States and the First Lady had just been diagnosed with the exact same highly specific and relatively rare autoimmune disease.
Yeah, which has all the hallmarks of a geopolitical thriller, right? You
Yeah.
have two world leaders suddenly experiencing rapid weight loss, erratic heartbeats, systemic exhaustion.
And they both have it. So naturally, the intelligence community assumed it was an assassination attempt or, some kind of chemical poisoning.
Because the statistical odds of a husband and wife independently developing this specific disease while living in the same house are just astronomical.
Completely off the charts. So today, we are taking a custom-tailored deep dive into that very culprit. We're talking about hyperthyroidism.
Specifically, we're looking at what happens when the thyroid races.
Exactly. When the thyroid races,
Yeah.
we've got a massive stack of clinical studies, historical records, and medical pathology notes for this one. And since you already know your way around the endocrine system, we are not going to waste your time defining, what a gland is.
Right. We can skip the absolute basics today.
Yeah, our mission today is to unpack the actual cellular mechanisms of how excess thyroid hormone completely hijacks the pace at which you exist.
Which is fascinating. We'll explore why the medical distinction between a gland actively manufacturing a hormone versus just leaking it is literally a matter of life and death.
And we'll get into why the classic symptoms of this disease are actually a massive, really dangerous diagnostic trap if you happen to be over the age of 60. So let's unpack this.
Let's do it. The overarching theme in all our sources today is a total loss of biological governance.
Biological governance, right.
Yeah, it's a system designed for a meticulous equilibrium, and suddenly it's held hostage.
Okay, so to really visualize this, you kind of have to throw out that old textbook analogy we all learned. You know, the one about the thyroid acting like a home thermostat?
Oh yeah, the thermostat analogy is a bit too simple for what's actually happening here.
Right. The sources paint a picture that looks way more like a complex global supply chain algorithm. Like the pituitary gland in your brain is the central software.
Sending out purchase orders.
Exactly, in the form of TSH, or thyroid-stimulating hormone.
Hmm.
So your thyroid gland is the manufacturing plant down the road.
It gets the TSH, it produces the goods, which are hormones T4 and T3, and it ships them out into the blood.
And normally, when the market is saturated, the central software sees that and stops sending purchase orders. So factory powers down. But in hyperthyroidism, that entire feedback loop is just shattered.
It's completely shattered because the factory is being forced to run at maximum capacity, just ignoring the central software entirely.
Now, so TSH drops to 0, but the factory is still cranking out T3 and T4.
Right. And when we look at the downstream effects of that overproduction, it gets incredibly molecular. Like, we all know thyroid hormone speeds up metabolism, but the actual how is what's so fascinating.
And actual cellular mechanics.
Yes. When you have too much T3 entering your cells, it physically alters your cellular infrastructure. It upregulates the transcription of sodium-potassium ATPase pumps.
Wait, let me stop you there.
Yeah.
Because the sheer energetic cost of that is staggering.
It really is.
Because, just to remind you, those pumps exist in the cell membrane to move sodium out and potassium in. They maintain electrical gradients.
That's right.
But they run on ATP, which is the body's raw energy currency.
Exactly. So you're forcing the cell to install millions of extra pumps, and all of them are demanding ATP.
So your body is frantically burning through its fuel reserves just to shuffle microscopic ions back and forth across a cell membrane.
Yeah. That's exactly why you can be sitting perfectly still on your couch, reading a book, while your body is internally idling at like 5,000 RPMs. Furthermore, the excess hormone physically increases the number and the activity of mitochondria.
The cellular engines.
Right. It forces them to burn even more oxygen and generate massive amounts of internal heat.
Which perfectly explains the ravenous hunger paired with severe weight loss and that intense heat intolerance people get.
Exactly. You are basically running a fever without an actual infection.
But the sources also focus heavily on the nervous system. Like, the phrase sympathetic overdrive comes up constantly. So is the thyroid hormone actually causing the body to flood with extra adrenaline? Or is something else happening?
See, that is a crucial distinction. It is usually not producing more adrenaline at all.
Oh, really?
No. Instead, the excess thyroid hormone dramatically increases the density of beta-adrenergic receptors on your tissues,
Great.
particularly in the heart and the nervous system.
So it sensitizes the tissue.
Highly sensitizes it, yeah.
So the ambient, totally normal amount of adrenaline circulating in your blood suddenly hits an organ that has, like, 10 times the number of receptors it normally does.
Exactly. The signal is massively amplified. That's why your resting heart rate climbs to 110, maybe 130 beats per minute.
And you develop that fine tremor in your hands.
Right. Your central nervous system is so hypersensitized that you experience crippling physical anxiety, profound insomnia.
Because the physical hardware of your body is reacting exactly as if you were being chased by a bear 24 hours a day.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so what is initiating this biological hack?
Yeah.
Like, if the pituitary software sees the system redlining and it drops its TSH purchase orders to absolute zero, why does the thyroid factory keep running?
Well, that mystery actually wasn't solved until this monumental breakthrough in 1956.
Oh, the Donius-Roth team.
Yeah, a team of researchers, including Deborah Doniach and Ivan Reut, they identified this anomalous protein in the blood of these patients. They originally called it LATS, long-acting thyroid stimulator.
Right, but today we know it as TSI, or thyroid-stimulating immunoglobulin.
Exactly. It's an autoantibody.
Meaning your own immune system engineered it.
Engineered it to be a perfect structural mimic, yeah. This antibody is shaped just enough like the natural TSH molecule that it can physically dock right into the TSH receptors on the surface of your thyroid cells.
That is genuinely terrifying.
Yeah.
I mean, it's identity theft on a cellular level.
It really is.
Like, the pituitary software has shut down the servers, dropping your lab-tested TSH to nearly undetectable levels, like 0.01.
But the factory workers are basically being held at gunpoint.
Right. By these rogue antibodies that have physically broken into the facility and just pulled the fire alarm, forcing production to run continuously.
And the worst part is, unlike the natural hormone, the antibody doesn't obey the negative feedback loop.
Because it's not supposed to be there.
Exactly. No matter how saturated the blood gets with T4 and T3, the antibody never detaches. It just keeps stimulating the gland over and over.
And this specific mechanism, this is the pathology of Graves' disease, right?
Yes. Which is a huge deal historically because it reclassified this whole thing from some mysterious glandular affliction into one of the very first definitively mapped autoimmune diseases.
Okay, so assuming you're a clinician and you see this biochemical fingerprint, you see a suppressed TSH paired with skyrocketing T4 and T3. You obviously have to shut the factory down.
Right, intervention is necessary.
But the sources get into this massive, honestly pedantic-sounding fight over two terms, hyperthyroidism versus thyrotoxicosis. And at first glance, I read that and thought, who cares? This is just medical semantics.
It sounds like it, yeah.
But if a doctor gets this wrong, they could administer a completely useless, highly toxic treatment, couldn't they?
They absolutely could. Precision in medical language dictates survival here.
Wow.
Yeah. So thyrotoxicosis is the umbrella term. It simply denotes the clinical state of having too much thyroid hormone acting on your tissues, regardless of where it actually came from.
Okay, umbrella term.
Yeah.
Got it.
But hyperthyroidism is a strict subset of that condition. It specifically dictates that the thyroid gland itself is actively manufacturing the excess hormone, like we just saw in Graves' disease.
Okay, so let's look at the alternative then. Imagine you, as the listener, get a viral infection that attacks the thyroid gland. Subacute thyroiditis, right?
Right.
The gland becomes heavily inflamed, the follicles literally rupture, and all the preformed thyroid hormone stored inside just spills out into the bloodstream at once.
In that scenario, the patient is highly thyrotoxic. They have the tremors, the racing heart, the weight loss.
But they are emphatically not hyperthyroid.
Exactly. Because the synthetic machinery of the gland is broken, not overactive. The factory is on fire and the warehouse is collapsing. It's not building new inventory.
Which means if I, say, accidentally double-dosed my levothyroxine prescription for 2 weeks straight, I'd also be thyrotoxic, but not hyperthyroid.
Correct, because the hormone came from a pill bottle, not your own gland.
Okay, so that logic is exactly why the distinction matters for treatment, isn't it?
Yes, because the primary pharmacological weapons against an overactive thyroid are antithyroid drugs, like methimazole.
And how do those work?
These drugs work by inhibiting an enzyme called thyroid peroxidase. Basically, they block the synthesis of new hormone.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So if the gland is just leaking from a viral infection, or if the patient took too many pills, prescribing methimazole is like trying to stop a flood by turning off the water main to a house where the pipes have already burst.
That is a perfect analogy.
The drug does literally nothing to stop the leaking. And you're just exposing the patient to potential liver toxicity and immune suppression for zero benefit.
Exactly. You'd be treating a manufacturing problem when you actually have a structural failure.
Yikes.
And historically, the medical field's inability to differentiate these states led to staggering harm.
Right. The sources mention the BMR era.
Throughout the early and mid-20th century, doctors just didn't have radioimmunoassays. They couldn't measure TSH levels down to the decimal point like we do today.
So what did they do?
They had to rely on the basal metabolic rate test, or BMR.
Right, where they measured how much oxygen a patient consumed at rest. The assumption being that if the cellular engines are running hot, they burn more oxygen.
Which is true in theory, but oxygen consumption can spike for 1,000 different reasons.
Yeah, that seems like a fatal flaw.
It was. If the patient had a low-grade fever, if they had undiagnosed anxiety, or honestly, even if they were just terrified of the intimidating medical equipment measuring their breath.
Their oxygen consumption would just spike above the 20% threshold.
Exactly.
So you had thousands of people misdiagnosed with hyperthyroidism just because they were nervous in a doctor's office.
Retrospective analyses in our sources show that countless patients underwent completely unnecessary, highly dangerous surgical thyroidectomies.
Literally having a vital organ cut out of their neck based on a sloppy proxy test.
It is a sobering reminder of how much we rely on the accuracy of our modern biomarkers.
Seriously.
But once those modern assays were developed, allowing us to see the exact autoimmune mechanics of Graves' disease, it just opened up the whole field of epidemiology.
Which brings us right back to 1991. And the CIA investigating Camp David.
Right. Let's go back to that.
So President George H.W. Bush develops atrial fibrillation while jogging. He gets tested, and boom, he is diagnosed with Graves' disease.
But First Lady Barbara Bush had been diagnosed with Graves just 3 years earlier in 1988.
Right. So the intelligence community assumed foul play. But what did the epidemiologists actually conclude when they looked at it?
They concluded it was a colossal, almost unbelievable statistical fluke.
Just a fluke.
Just a fluke. When you look at the raw data, Graves' disease is actually quite common. It affects about 1 in 200 people.
Okay, that's fairly common.
But there's a massive gender disparity. It is roughly 7 to 10 times more common in women, usually striking in their 30s to 50s.
So Barbara Bush developing it wasn't particularly anomalous at all.
No, not really.
But her husband, a male in his late 60s, developing the exact same autoimmune pathology in the same household 3 years later.
The math is highly improbable, sure, but not impossible. The environmental investigation turned up absolutely nothing in the water, the soil, the food, nothing.
Wow.
It was simply a coincidence that happened to strike the leaders of the free world simultaneously, triggering a national security crisis over an autoimmune cascade.
It's so fascinating how our brains desperately try to assign a narrative cause to pure mathematical variance. Like, we hate coincidences.
You really do.
And speaking of assigning narratives, the history of who actually discovered this disease is an absolute mess of academic lagging.
Oh, the naming rights are heavily fractured.
Yeah.
So a Welsh physician named Caleb Hillier Perry was unequivocally the first to document the clinical cluster, palpitations, goiter, bulging eyes.
And this was way back.
Around 1786, but he just kept it in his personal notes. They weren't published until 1825, completely after he died.
Which is the ultimate cautionary tale of publish or perish. So the medical community largely just ignores Perry.
Exactly. Then an Irish physician named Robert James Graves published formal lectures on the exact same triad of symptoms in 1835.
Okay, hence Graves' disease.
Right. But then, completely independently, a German physician named Karl Adolf von Bastow described the syndrome in 1840.
Leading to the geographical split we still have today. Like, in the English-speaking world, you'll hear it called Graves' disease. But if you read medical literature from continental Europe, they refer to it as Bastow's disease.
Yeah, but the funny thing is, none of these men actually knew what was causing the goiter and the racing heart. They were just categorizing the visual fallout.
The mechanistic understanding didn't evolve until much later.
Right, not until the early 1900s. That's when Henry Stanley Plummer at the Mayo Clinic made a critical observation.
What did he find?
He realized that not every patient with a hyperactive thyroid had those autoimmune antibodies of Graves' disease. He identified toxic multinodular goiter, which is often called Plummer's disease.
And how does that differ mechanically from Graves'?
Well, instead of the entire thyroid gland being uniformly stimulated by rogue TSI antibodies...
Like the whole factory running amok.
Right. In Plummer's, patients developed isolated mutated nodules, just little spherical lumps of thyroid tissue.
Okay.
And these nodules undergo genetic mutation that essentially cuts their brake lines. They completely ignore the pituitary's TSH signals and autonomously pump out massive amounts of hormone all on their own.
While the rest of the healthy gland goes dormant trying to compensate.
Exactly.
That distinction directly addresses one of the most pervasive misconceptions in our sources today.
Which one?
Well, if you see a movie character or read a book describing someone with an overactive thyroid, they almost always have exophthalmos. Those very intense, visually striking, bulging eyes.
Ah, yes.
But the sources are crystal clear. The bulging eyes are not caused by the high thyroid hormone itself.
Not at all. If high thyroid hormone caused the eyes to bulge, then patients with Plummer's disease or a viral thyroiditis leak would exhibit it too.
Right, but they never do.
Never. Exophthalmos is strictly unique to Graves' disease.
Because it is a totally independent autoimmune attack. Can you break down the actual cellular pathology of what's happening right behind the eye?
Absolutely. So behind your orbit, you have connective tissue populated by cells called fibroblasts.
Okay.
In Graves' disease, those same rogue TSI antibodies, the ones mimicking TSH, they mistakenly recognize a protein receptor on the surface of these fibroblasts too.
So they attack the eye tissue as well.
Yeah. The antibodies dock there and trigger a massive inflammatory response. The fibroblasts start overproducing glycosaminoglycans, which are essentially complex carbohydrates that act like biological sponges.
Oh, so they draw in a massive amount of water.
Yes. The tissue behind the eye just swells with fluid and cellular infiltration.
But because the bony orbit of the skull can't expand, that swelling only has one direction to go.
Outward. It physically pushes the globe of the eye forward. It's a localized autoimmune assault that just happens to run parallel to the thyroid assault.
The interconnectedness of these systems is just staggering. You have a protein mismatch that alters your metabolism and physically reshapes your face.
Yeah, it's intense.
But let's look at what happens when this systemic pressure boils over into the extremes. The sources detail a condition called thyroid storm.
Oh, yes.
And honestly, it reads like a physiological horror story.
Thyroid storm is the decompensated, extreme endpoint of untreated or poorly managed hyperthyroidism.
That does get triggered.
The patient usually encounters a secondary physiological stressor, like a severe systemic infection, physical trauma, or even a surgical procedure.
Okay, so the body tries to mount a normal stress response.
Right. But because the tissues are already maximally sensitized by the excess thyroid hormone, the entire system essentially redlines and goes into failure.
The vital signs detailed here are terrifying. The sources note body temperature spiking above 104 degrees Fahrenheit,
Heart rates blasting past 140 beats per minute.
paired with severe delirium, jaundice, and seizures.
Historically, if a patient entered a thyroid storm, they had a 20 to 30% chance of dying.
Wow.
And honestly, even today, with modern ICU interventions, the mortality rate still hovers around 10%.
That's incredibly high for modern medicine.
It is so chaotic and fast-moving that in 1993, endocrinologists Wartofsky and Birch designed the Birch-Wartofsky point scale.
How does a clinician actually use that in real time, like when a patient crashes?
It basically removes the guesswork. You assign a specific numerical value to the patient's temperature, the severity of their central nervous system agitation-like, whether they are just restless or fully comatose.
Okay.
You score the degree of heart failure and their gastrointestinal dysfunction. If the total score crosses a threshold of 45, you do not wait for lab tests to come back from pathology.
And just act.
You declare a thyroid storm and immediately intervene to block hormone synthesis, block the beta receptors, and physically cool the patient's core.
Okay, so a thyroid storm is the loud, hyper-aggressive extreme of the disease. But the sources highlight a completely opposite manifestation that acts as a massive diagnostic trap.
The elderly presentation.
Yes. Misconception number 2. We assume all hyperthyroid patients will be visibly trembling, manic, and hyperactive. But if you are an elderly patient, your body might do the exact opposite.
Geriatric medicine categorizes this as apathetic hyperthyroidism.
Apathetic.
Yeah. Instead of presenting with hyperkinesia and anxiety, older adults often present with profound lethargy, severe clinical depression, extreme apathy, and unexplained weight loss.
Why does the presentation invert so drastically? Like, why the total opposite symptoms?
Because the aging cardiovascular and nervous systems simply lack the physiological reserve to mount that hyperkinetic response.
Oh, I see.
When they are flooded with excess thyroid hormone, instead of revving up like a race car, the systems just immediately burn out and surrender.
Wow. You can easily imagine a clinician seeing an 80-year-old patient who has lost 20 pounds, has zero energy, and just seems utterly disengaged from life.
Absolutely. The doctor is immediately going to start screening for hidden malignancies, like pancreatic cancer, or they'll prescribe high-dose antidepressants.
And they completely miss the fact that the patient's thyroid is secretly flooding their system and basically burning them out from the inside.
It is one of the most perilous misdirections in diagnostic medicine.
It really is.
And the danger isn't even limited to overt cases. There is a fierce, ongoing clinical debate centered around subclinical hyperthyroidism.
Right, let's define that for a listener who might be looking at their own lab panel. Subclinical means your TSH is suppressed, so the pituitary is desperately trying to shut the factory down. But your actual circulating free T4 and T3 remain squarely in the normal reference range.
So the body is successfully compensating for now.
Right. The clinical dilemma is, do you intervene with drugs or radiation, or do you leave a perfectly normal-feeling patient alone and just watch them?
And for a long time, the consensus was just to watch and wait.
But the sources bring up the 1994 Framingham Heart Study, which fundamentally altered that approach, didn't it?
It did, yeah. The researchers tracked a cohort of older adults over age 60 who had this subclinical low TSH, but totally normal hormone levels.
What did they find?
Over 10 years, they found that those individuals had roughly 3 times the risk of developing atrial fibrillation.
Which is a chaotic, dangerous heart rhythm that can easily lead to a stroke.
Exactly. 3 times the risk compared to people with normal TSH.
A 300% increase in risk from an imbalance that most doctors use to just dismiss as a lab curiosity.
It proves that the cardiac tissue is exquisitely sensitive to even cumulative mild hormone exposure over a decade.
Which pivots perfectly into something that I think will profoundly shock anyone listening who frequents health food stores.
Ah, the iodine paradox.
Yes, let's tackle misconception number 4, the iodine paradox. If you walk down the supplement aisle, you will see rows of kelp and iodine drops marketed specifically for thyroid support.
Oh, everywhere.
Right. Because the public assumption is that iodine is the raw material for thyroid hormone, so more is always better. Are the sources actually suggesting that taking these supplements could trigger the very disease we are talking about?
They absolutely are. It is a stunning biochemical paradox.
How does that even work?
Well, intuitively, you assume that if you flood an overactive factory with its favorite raw material, it will just build more product, right?
Sure.
But the healthy human thyroid has this brilliant autoregulatory failsafe known as the Wolff-Chaikoff effect.
Okay, explain the biological mechanics of that failsafe.
If you expose a normal, healthy thyroid to a sudden, massive dose of iodine, the intracellular concentration of iodide spikes so high that it actually temporarily inhibits the enzyme thyroid peroxidase.
No, interesting.
The gland effectively says, whoa, that is way too much raw material, shut down the assembly line.
So it halts the organification of iodine for a few days to protect you from producing a lethal amount of hormone.
Exactly.
Okay, so the healthy system protects itself. Where does the paradox come in?
The danger is the Jod-Basedow phenomenon.
Okay.
If a patient has an undiagnosed autonomous nodule, like we talked about with Plummer's disease, or even early subclinical Graves' disease, that mutated or hijacked tissue lacks the Wolff-Chaikoff failsafe.
It doesn't have the brakes.
It doesn't know how to shut down. So if you expose that patient to a huge iodine load, you are just handing unlimited ammunition to a rogue factory.
Oh, wow.
The gland utilizes all of it, triggering a massive, uncontrollable burst of hormone overproduction.
So the supplement you literally took to support your thyroid actually pushes you straight into thyrotoxicosis.
Yeah, precisely.
But surely this isn't just a risk for people taking too much kelp. The sources mention the clinical implications of this in actual hospitals.
That is where the stakes get incredibly high. Think about a routine CT scan with contrast dye.
Oh, right.
That contrast medium injected into your veins is heavily iodinated. Or consider the drug amiodarone.
What is amiodarone?
It's one of the most effective, commonly prescribed medications globally for managing severe cardiac arrhythmias. But by weight, amiodarone is roughly 37% iodine.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
So a cardiologist prescribes amiodarone to stabilize a patient's dangerous heart rhythm. But if that patient happens to have susceptible autonomous thyroid tissue, the massive iodine load in the drug triggers the Jod-Basedow phenomenon.
Exactly. The very medication meant to save their heart inadvertently forces their thyroid to flood the body with hormone,
which in turn causes the heart rate to skyrocket again.
completely derailing the cardiac treatment. It forces cardiologists and endocrinologists to perform this incredibly tense, high-stakes tightrope walk when managing these patients.
It is the ultimate domino effect. You try to stabilize one vital system, and the biochemical blowback entirely dismantles another.
It's a delicate balance.
Man, this has been a truly revelatory journey through the internal mechanics of human metabolism.
It's a complex system for sure.
We started with the pituitary's supply chain algorithm being fundamentally hacked by structurally mimicked antibodies in Graves' disease.
We unpacked that critical load-bearing distinction between a gland that is actively manufacturing excess hormone versus one that is structurally compromised and merely leaking it.
Right, a distinction that literally dictates whether a patient is cured or poisoned by medication.
Exactly.
We looked at the statistical anomaly that hit the Bush White House, the incredibly deceptive presentation of apathetic hyperthyroidism in the elderly.
And finally, the paradox of iodine. How the essential biological building block of the thyroid can be the exact trigger that causes the engine to just redline.
Absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
As we wrap up, I want to leave you with a lingering thought that builds on everything we've explored today.
Okay.
We discussed how the TSI antibodies in Graves' disease are engineered to perfectly mimic the shape of the TSH molecule, right?
Mhm.
Tricking the receptor into leaving the factory running.
Yeah, a flawless biological forgery.
Exactly, an immune system capability that we're honestly only just beginning to truly map.
Oh, for sure.
So if our own immune systems are capable of generating perfectly mimicked hormonal keys that can entirely hijack a major organ, what other unseen signals, what other mysterious metabolic, psychiatric, or even systemic conditions that currently baffle modern medicine might actually just be undetected immune mimicry?
That is a great question. How many other systems in our bodies are currently being hacked by our own cells in ways science hasn't even discovered yet?
It forces us to question the root cause of almost any unexplained physiological shift.
It really does.
Definitely something to seriously ponder the next time you feel your heart suddenly racing. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into when the body's internal accelerator gets stuck to the floor. We will catch you on the next one.